My name is Eleanor Wilson, and at 68 years old, I never expected to hear my own son say I was just waiting to die. But there I was, standing frozen in my kitchen, holding the apple pie I had baked from scratch, listening to my 3 children discuss my eventual death and their inheritance plans. After 42 years of marriage and 2 years as a widow, I thought I knew heartbreak. I was wrong. What I did next shocked them all and changed my life forever. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button if you want more stories about standing up for yourself. I had a good life, at least that's what everyone would have said. For nearly 3 decades, I worked as a hospital administrator, rising to chief operations officer before I retired at 63. I was married to Richard for 42 wonderful years before a sudden heart attack took him from me 2 years ago. We had 3 children together. Patrick, 45, a financial advisor with his own firm. Veronica, 42, who runs a successful interior design business. And Gregory, 38, who works in software development. Between them, they gave us 5 grandchildren who used to be the light of my life. When Richard died, I thought my world had ended. He was my partner in everything, from raising our children to planning our retirement. We had dreams of traveling the world, visiting all those places we had only seen in magazines and movies. Instead, I found myself alone in our 5-bedroom colonial home in a wealthy Boston suburb, surrounded by memories and silence. The first few months after the funeral, my children seemed wonderfully supportive. Patrick helped me organize Richard's financial affairs, explaining that my husband had left me well provided for with approximately $2.4 million in investments, plus our fully paid home worth another $1 million, and various insurance policies. Veronica came bi-weekly to check on me, often bringing groceries or flowers. Gregory would call every few days, sometimes bringing his children for impromptu visits. I was grateful for their presence as I navigated my new reality as a widow. The silence in the house was the hardest part. After decades of hearing Richard's keys jingling as he walked through the door, his deep laugh echoing through the hallways, and the gentle snoring that had initially annoyed me, but eventually became a comforting nighttime soundtrack, the emptiness was deafening. But something began to shift about 6 months after Richard's passing. It started so subtly that I hardly noticed it at first. Patrick began questioning my financial decisions, however minor they might be. When I mentioned donating to the hospital's new cancer wing, he frowned and suggested I think about the future instead. When I bought a new television to replace our ancient model, he asked if I really needed to be spending money right now. Veronica's helpful visits transformed too. Rather than asking what I needed, she began rearranging my furniture without consultation. "This layout is safer for you, Mom," she would say, moving my favorite reading chair from the window to a corner I never used. She reorganized my kitchen cabinets for efficiency, leaving me unable to find anything. When I expressed frustration, she sighed with the patience one might show a difficult child and said, "I'm just trying to make things easier for you." Gregory's calls became less frequent, and when he did visit with the children, he would glance around the house as if taking inventory. Once I overheard him telling his oldest son, "Someday this might be yours," while pointing to Richard's antique desk that had been in his family for generations. The weekly family dinners that began as a way to keep me company evolved into what felt like inspection visits. They would exchange glances when I mentioned a new friend I had made at my book club, or if I forgot a minor detail in a story. If I mentioned a headache or my arthritis acting up, it would trigger an exchange of meaningful looks between them. "Have you thought about assisted living, Mom?" Patrick asked one Sunday over roast chicken that no one complimented despite my spending hours preparing it. "Many of them are like resorts these days. You'd have people checking on you, making sure you're safe." "I'm perfectly safe here," I replied, trying to keep my voice light. "Mrs. Reynolds next door keeps an eye out, and I have my alert pendant if anything happens." "But you're all alone in this big house," Veronica chimed in. "It's a lot to maintain at your age." "And my age?" As if 68 was ancient. My own mother had lived independently until she was 92, sharp as a tack until the very end. My son-in-law, Veronica's husband Thomas, began asking pointed questions about my portfolio. "Just curious about what kind of estate planning Richard did," he would say casually. "For tax purposes." My daughter-in-law, Patrick's wife Jennifer, started bringing brochures for senior communities, leaving them accidentally on my coffee table. When I would find them and hand them back, she would smile tightly and say, "Just something to consider, Eleanor." Even my grandchildren's behavior changed. They visited less frequently, and when they did, they seemed distracted, often asking if they could have specific items they saw around the house. "Grandma, would you ever give me great-grandma's pearl necklace?" My 14-year-old granddaughter Sophia asked during one visit, eyeing the jewelry I was wearing. "Mom says it would look perfect for my prom someday." I began to withdraw, not just from my family but from life itself. I turned down invitations from friends, began to question my own judgment, and stopped making plans for the future. Why bother when my children seemed to be simply waiting for me to become incapacitated or worse? My old friend Judith noticed the change in me during our monthly lunch. "Eleanor, you don't seem yourself lately. Is everything all right?" I made excuses about still adjusting to life without Richard. But the truth was more painful than I could admit. My own children were treating me as if I had one foot in the grave, and worse, I was beginning to believe them. Mother's Day was supposed to be special. I had always loved hosting my family, cooking their favorite dishes, and basking in the chaos of having everyone together. This Mother's Day, 2 years after Richard's death, I had spent days preparing. I made Patrick's favorite beef Wellington, Veronica's preferred roasted vegetable salad, and Gregory's beloved cheesecake for dessert. I had set the table with my best china, polished the silver candlesticks that had been a wedding gift, and even put fresh flowers in every room. They were all supposed to arrive at 3 in the afternoon. By 4:15, they had all texted excuses for their lateness. Patrick had a client emergency, Veronica was finishing up a design proposal, and Gregory's son had a last-minute baseball practice. By the time everyone arrived at 5:30, the beef Wellington was dry, the salad wilted, and my spirits dampened. "Sorry we're late, Mom," Patrick said, barely glancing at me as he scrolled through his phone. His wife Jennifer handed me a generic greeting card signed by them both, the price tag still attached to the envelope. Veronica breezed in with an orchid plant. "The table looks nice, but why did you use these old napkins? The blue clashes with your plateware." She immediately began refolding the napkins I had carefully pressed. Gregory at least gave me a hug, but then immediately asked if I had any beer in the fridge, disappearing into the kitchen before I could properly greet his wife and children. Throughout dinner, the conversation revolved around their lives, their children's accomplishments, and their work challenges. When I tried to share a story about my book club's discussion of a new bestseller, Patrick checked his watch, and Veronica began clearing plates before I had finished speaking. "I'll go get the cheesecake," I said, forcing a smile as I stood. No one acknowledged my comment as they continued their conversation about Veronica's latest high-profile client. In the kitchen, I carefully cut the cheesecake I had spent hours perfecting, arranging slices on my mother's antique dessert plates. Through the partially open door, I could hear their voices, now lowered but still audible in the quiet house. "Mom's just waiting to die anyway. We need to talk about the house." Patrick's voice came through clearly. "The market is hot right now, and this neighborhood could fetch well over asking price." I froze, the serving knife suspended over the cheesecake. "I think we could list it as soon as she agrees to the assisted living place I found," Veronica replied. "Once she's gone or in a home, we'll need to move quickly to avoid capital gains issues." "Do you think we should talk to her about giving us power of attorney?" Gregory asked. "Just to protect Mom from herself at this point. Last week she mentioned wanting to take a cruise to Alaska, a complete waste of money that should be going to the grandkids' college funds." "I've had my eye on Grandpa's Rolex," my grandson Tyler's voice chimed in. "Do you think Grandma would give it to me now instead of waiting for the will?" Speaking of the will, Thomas, my son-in-law, added, "Has anyone looked into how her investment portfolio is allocated? There could be significant tax advantages to restructuring before anything happens." My hands began to shake so badly that I had to set down the knife. They were discussing my death, my home, my possessions as if I were already gone, or at best, incapable of managing my own affairs. The beautiful day I had planned, the hours of cooking, the love I had poured into every detail, none of it mattered to them. I was just an inconvenient obstacle between them and their inheritance. I took several deep breaths, willing myself not to cry, not to scream, not to collapse under the weight of this betrayal. Then with trembling hands, I picked up the dessert tray and plastered a smile on my face as I returned to the dining room. "Who's ready for cheesecake?" I asked, my voice somehow steady despite the earthquake happening inside me. The conversation halted abruptly, guilty looks flashing across their faces as they turned to me with forced smiles. "Looks delicious, Mom," Gregory said, suddenly attentive. I served each of them, watching as they ate the dessert I had made with love, now tasting like ashes in my own mouth. I answered their questions mechanically, laughed at appropriate moments, and somehow made it through the rest of their visit without revealing the devastation I felt. As they left, none of them offered to help clean up. Patrick mentioned he'd call about that assisted living paperwork. Veronica reminded me she'd be by on Wednesday to help organize my closets, and Gregory promised to send links to senior-friendly smartphones. When the last car pulled out of the driveway, I closed the door and leaned against it, finally allowing the tears to come. I sobbed until there was nothing left, sitting among the dirty dishes and discarded gift wrap. The beautiful home that had been filled with love for decades now felt like a mausoleum where I was expected to quietly wait for death. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the darkness, replaying not just the conversations I had overheard, but years of subtle dismissals, patronizing tones, and gradual erosion of my autonomy. When had my children stopped seeing me as a person with hopes, dreams, and a future? When had I become merely an estate to be managed and divided? As the first light of dawn filtered through my curtains, I came to a painful realization. I had allowed this to happen. In my grief over Richard, I had gradually surrendered my independence, accepted their judgments, and begun to see myself through their diminishing lens. I had become invisible not because of my age but because I had stopped insisting on being seen. That morning as I sipped my coffee and watched the sunrise, a new resolve formed within me. I would not confront my children about what I had overheard. Words would be denied, intentions reinterpreted, and nothing would fundamentally change. Instead, I would take action. I would reclaim my life, my future, and my dignity in ways they could never imagine. The very next day, I called Samuel Rothstein, the attorney who had handled our family's legal matters for 30 years. Unlike my children, Samuel was in his 70s and treated me with the respect of a peer rather than the indulgence given to a child. "Eleanor, what a pleasure," he said warmly when I was shown into his office. "It's been too long. How are you holding up?" "Not as well as I thought," I admitted, settling into the leather chair across from his desk. "I need your help, Samuel, and your absolute discretion." His expression grew serious as I recounted what I had overheard. By the time I finished, his usually genial face had hardened with indignation. "Unconscionable," he muttered, shaking his head. "Richard would be appalled." "I don't want to confront them," I explained. "I want to rebuild my life on my terms, without their knowledge or interference. Can you help me?" Samuel leaned forward, determination in his eyes. "Eleanor, it would be my genuine pleasure." Over the next hour, we outlined a strategy. First, I would need a new location, somewhere distant enough to prevent casual visits, but not so remote that I would be isolated. Samuel suggested exploring properties in western North Carolina, an area known for its natural beauty, mild climate, and established communities of retirees seeking active, independent lifestyles. "My cousin has a real estate practice in Asheville," he offered. "She specializes in helping seniors relocate. I'll put you in touch, completely confidentially, of course." Next came the financial arrangements. While Patrick had helped me understand my portfolio after Richard's death, he wasn't the only one with access or authority. Samuel helped me contact my financial advisor, Martin Geller, who was initially surprised by my request to liquidate certain assets, but became supportive once I explained my situation in general terms. "Your money is yours to control, Eleanor," Martin assured me. "Richard always insisted on keeping your accounts structured for maximum independence. Your son has viewing privileges only, not control." Over the next 3 weeks, I met with Martin twice more, each time transferring funds to a new account at a different bank, one with no branches in Boston where I might be recognized. I was establishing my financial independence one transaction at a time. Meanwhile, I spent evenings researching on my iPad, being careful to clear my browsing history each night. I explored small communities in the Blue Ridge Mountains, studied basics of self-sufficient living, and joined online forums for seniors establishing new lives after major life changes. I learned about gardening zones, seasonal planting calendars, and food preservation. I watched videos on basic home repairs, emergency preparedness, and even self-defense for seniors. Through Samuel's cousin Rebecca, I found a promising property. A small but well-maintained 2-bedroom cabin on 3 acres of land, partially wooded with a year-round stream. It was located just outside a small town called Rivercrest, with a population of about 5,000 people, a community center, a local medical clinic, and a farmer's market that operated 3 seasons of the year. The cabin needed some updates but was immediately habitable, with a wood stove, propane heat backup, and a surprisingly modern kitchen. The previous owner was a retired engineer who installed solar panels and a sophisticated water filtration system, Rebecca explained during our video call. He passed away last year, and his children live on the West Coast. They're motivated to sell to someone who will appreciate his craftsmanship. The asking price was reasonable, especially compared to Boston real estate, and well within my budget even after setting aside funds for renovations and living expenses. After a virtual tour and many questions, I made an offer, which was quickly accepted. While these arrangements progressed, I maintained my normal routine with my family. I endured Patrick's financial advice sessions, where he repeatedly suggested I consider selling unnecessary assets to simplify my estate. During one such conversation, he offered to take care of selling some stocks that he deemed underperforming. "That's thoughtful, Patrick, but I'll discuss it with Martin first," I replied mildly. His expression tightened momentarily before he forced a smile. "Of course, Mom, but remember Martin works for us. We should be directing the strategy." I nodded non-committally, secretly pleased by his confusion at my small assertion of independence. Veronica continued her campaign to organize my life, arriving unannounced with new storage containers and labeling systems. "These adjustable shelves will be much better for someone your height, Mom," she explained, as if I hadn't been successfully reaching my own cabinets for decades. Instead of arguing, I thanked her and asked innocent questions about her design clients, letting her boast about her latest projects, while I mentally inventoried what personal treasures I would take with me and what could be left behind. Gregory's contributions to my infantilization were more technological. He installed senior-friendly applications on my phone and repeatedly offered to set up cameras throughout my house for security. "I value my privacy too much for cameras, Gregory," I said firmly when he brought it up again. "Privacy won't help if you fall and can't reach your phone, Mom," he countered, that familiar patronizing tone creeping into his voice. I changed the subject, asking about his children's activities while silently adding research-secure communication options to my mental checklist. Samuel helped me revise my will, creating a new document that would only be revealed after my departure. We established trusts for my grandchildren's education with specific disbursement terms, allocated funds to several charities supporting elderly independence, and made provisions for the personal items I would leave behind. My children would receive family photographs and mementos of sentimental value only, with the bulk of my estate directed elsewhere. "Are you certain about these terms, Eleanor?" Samuel asked as I reviewed the document. "They're quite different from your previous arrangements." "I'm certain," I replied without hesitation. "My children have made it clear they're waiting for my assets, not cherishing my presence. Let them have the memories. Others will make better use of the resources." With the legal and financial arrangements secured, I turned my attention to practical preparations. I began purchasing supplies I would need for my new home, storing them temporarily in lidded plastic bins labeled seasonal decorations in my basement. I ordered practical, comfortable clothing online, items suited for a more rural lifestyle than my current wardrobe of designer brands Veronica had insisted were appropriate for my position. The closing on the cabin was handled remotely through Samuel's office. I signed the documents with a strange mixture of terror and exhilaration, becoming the owner of a small mountain property none of my family knew existed. I arranged for the house keys to be left with a local property manager who would prepare the cabin for my arrival, stocking basic groceries and ensuring utilities were connected. My family home, the center of our lives for 30 years, would be harder to part with. After careful consideration, I decided to list it with a delayed closing option, allowing the sale process to begin but giving me control over the final timing. The realtor, a contemporary of mine who had sold us the house originally, was discreet and supportive when I explained I wasn't ready to announce my plans to my family. "You deserve to make your own choices, Eleanor," she assured me. "I've seen too many capable seniors pressured by well-meaning but controlling children." As the pieces of my plan fell into place, I experienced moments of doubt and fear. Was I overreacting? Would I be able to manage on my own in a new place? Was I burning bridges that could never be rebuilt? But then I would remember Patrick's casual dismissal. "Mom's just waiting to die anyway." And my resolve would strengthen. I wasn't waiting to die. I was preparing to live, truly live, perhaps for the first time since Richard's passing. The date of my departure approached, and I made my final arrangements. I selected the morning after Patrick's birthday dinner as my leaving date, knowing they would all be present the night before, giving me one last memory of my family together in our home. I packed a single suitcase with essentials and 3 small boxes of irreplaceable treasures: photo albums, Richard's letters, my mother's recipe book, and a few pieces of jewelry with sentimental rather than monetary value. The night before my departure, I sat alone in Richard's study, surrounded by the books and mementos of our shared life. "Am I doing the right thing?" I whispered to his photograph. The familiar face smiled back at me, and I could almost hear his voice. "Eleanor, you've always been the brave one. I believe in you." In that moment, I knew with complete certainty that I was making the right choice. Not out of spite or revenge, but out of self-preservation and self-respect. I was choosing life when everyone around me had decided my story was ending. I was choosing myself. The morning after Patrick's birthday dinner dawned clear and crisp, a perfect October day. I had been awake since 4, too anxious and excited to sleep. I moved quietly through the house, double-checking that I had packed everything essential, that my note was properly placed on the kitchen table, and that all traces of my preparations had been removed. The note was simple but clear. "I've decided to live my life on my terms. Please respect my decision for space. I'll contact you when I'm ready. I am safe and well. Mom." I knew it would trigger panic, confusion, and probably anger, but it contained no details they could use to track me down immediately. Samuel would contact them in 3 days with minimal information, that I was well, had made this decision of sound mind, and wished for privacy. By then I would be settled in my new home, hundreds of miles away. At 5:30, I made a final walk through the house that had sheltered our family for 3 decades. In the living room, I remembered Christmas mornings with excited children tearing into presents. In the kitchen, countless family meals, homework sessions, and late-night conversations over tea. The backyard had hosted graduation parties, summer barbecues, and one beautiful garden wedding when Veronica married Thomas. So many memories, some bittersweet now given recent revelations, but precious nonetheless. I wasn't abandoning these memories, I reminded myself. I was carrying them with me while refusing to become a memory myself before my time. My SUV was packed strategically, essential items accessible, nothing visible that would suggest a permanent departure rather than a short trip. I had told no one of my plans except Samuel, who had promised to monitor the situation and alert me if my children's reactions warranted legal intervention. At 6:15, I backed out of my driveway for the last time. The neighborhood was quiet, most houses still dark in the early morning. Mrs. Reynolds next door, an early riser like me, was collecting her newspaper and waved cheerfully. I waved back, feeling a momentary pang that I wouldn't be able to say a proper goodbye to the kind neighbor who had been a genuine friend during my widowhood. As I navigated through familiar streets toward the highway, a complex mixture of emotions washed over me. Terror at the enormity of what I was doing, exhilaration at taking control of my life, sadness at the breakdown of family relationships that had led to this moment, hope for the new connections I might form. Once on the interstate heading south, I sent a brief text to Samuel. "Eagle has left the nest." His immediate response, "Godspeed, Eleanor," brought unexpected tears to my eyes. I turned off my phone then, knowing that by mid-morning it would be buzzing constantly with messages and calls from my children. I had purchased a new prepaid phone for emergencies, with a number known only to Samuel. My regular phone would remain off until I was ready to deal with the inevitable fallout. The 6-hour journey to my new home passed in a blur of highways, small towns, and increasingly mountainous terrain. I stopped only for bathroom breaks and coffee, too nervous to eat despite the granola bars and fruit I had packed. With each mile that passed, Boston and my old life receded, and the possibility of a self-determined future grew stronger. As I turned onto the gravel road leading to my property, following the detailed directions provided by Rebecca, the reality of what I had done finally hit me fully. I was starting over completely at 68 years old. The carefully maintained suburban existence I had known was behind me, replaced by 3 acres of partially wild land and a cabin I had only seen through video calls. The road curved through thick woods before opening to a small clearing where my new home waited. The cabin was smaller than I had expected, despite knowing its exact dimensions. A simple structure of weathered wood with a covered porch across the front, a metal roof, and windows that reflected the afternoon sunlight. A thin spiral of smoke rose from the chimney, indicating the property manager had prepared for my arrival as promised. I parked beside the cabin and sat for a moment, gathering my courage. Then I stepped out into the cool mountain air, inhaling deeply the scent of pine and wood smoke. The silence was profound after a lifetime in the city, broken only by birdsong and the distant sound of running water from the stream at the property's edge. The cabin key was under a flower pot on the porch, as arranged. My hands trembled slightly as I unlocked the door and stepped inside my new home. The main room was open plan, combining living area, dining space, and kitchen. A wood stove occupied one corner, currently hosting a small, welcoming fire. 2 doors presumably led to bedrooms, and a third to what I knew was a surprisingly modern bathroom, updated by the previous owner. The property manager had stocked the refrigerator with basics as requested: milk, eggs, bread, butter, and fresh fruit. A basket on the counter held locally made jam, honey, and a welcome note with information about the area and emergency contact numbers. I moved through the space slowly, opening cabinets, testing faucets, familiarizing myself with what was now mine. The furniture was simple but solid, left by the previous owner and included in the sale. A comfortable-looking sofa faced the wood stove, flanked by reading lamps. The dining table was handcrafted from local wood, according to Rebecca, with 4 mismatched but charming chairs. It took several trips to unload my SUV, bringing in first the essentials for the night, then the boxes of personal treasures. By sunset, I had made up the bed with fresh linens, arranged my toiletries in the bathroom, and placed a few meaningful photographs around the cabin. These small touches transformed the space from a stranger's home to the beginning of my own. That first night alone was challenging. Every creak and rustle outside seemed magnified in the unfamiliar darkness. The wind in the trees created shadows that danced across the walls, and distant animal sounds made me question my decision to live so far from civilization. I lay awake for hours, alternating between excited planning for my new life and moments of panic at what I had left behind. What if I became ill? What if the winter was harsher than expected? What if I simply couldn't adapt to such a dramatic change? And beneath these practical concerns lay deeper fears. Had I destroyed my relationship with my children forever? Would I grow lonely without family connections? Was I being selfish or brave? Somewhere in the early morning hours, exhaustion finally overcame anxiety, and I fell into a deep sleep. I awoke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and momentary disorientation before remembering. This was my new home, my new life, my new beginning. I wrapped myself in a robe and stepped onto the porch with a cup of coffee, watching as the rising sun illuminated my property. In the daylight, I could better see the neglected garden area near the cabin, the small shed that needed repairs, and the wooded area that comprised about half my land. Beyond my property, mountains rose in the distance, their peaks catching the morning light. The challenges ahead were significant, but standing there in the quiet beauty of the morning, I felt more alive than I had in years. This wasn't the end of my story as my children had assumed. It was simply the beginning of a new chapter, one I would write myself. The first few weeks in my new home were both exhilarating and terrifying. Simple tasks became adventures. Figuring out how to operate the propane stove, learning the quirks of the water heater, discovering which local market had the best produce. The internet connection was spotty at best, especially during storms, forcing me to become less dependent on technology and more attuned to my immediate environment. 3 days after my arrival, Martha Hendricks, my nearest neighbor about a quarter-mile down the road, appeared on my porch with a welcome basket. At 72, she stood straight as a pine tree, her silver hair cut in a practical bob, her weathered face creased with laugh lines. "Thought you might appreciate some homemade essentials," she said, handing me the basket filled with preserves, freshly baked bread, and handcrafted soap. Moving to the mountains can be an adjustment. I invited her in for coffee, grateful for human connection after days of solitude. Martha turned out to be a widow like myself, having moved to the area 10 years earlier after her husband's death. A retired nurse, she had chosen the mountains for their healing properties, both physical and spiritual. "Best decision I ever made," she declared, accepting a second cup of coffee. "Though my daughters thought I'd lost my mind at first. Now they bring the grandkids for visits and don't want to leave." Her casual mention of reconciled family relationships gave me a flicker of hope for my own situation. Samuel had informed me that my children were indeed distraught, alternating between worry and anger. They had filed a missing persons report despite his assurances of my well-being, and Patrick was threatening legal action to have me declared incompetent. So far, the careful legal groundwork we had laid was holding firm, but I knew this was just the beginning of their efforts. Martha became my first friend and informal guide to mountain living. She introduced me to the local farmers market, where I met other community members who welcomed the new city lady with curiosity and kindness. Through Martha, I learned which local handyman was reliable, which doctor in town treated seniors with respect rather than condescension, and which roads became impassable during winter storms. The physical demands of my new lifestyle were significant but ultimately beneficial. Daily walks around my property and along community trails strengthened muscles that had grown soft during my suburban existence. Working in the garden, clearing years of overgrowth to prepare for spring planting, left me exhausted but satisfied. I lost weight without trying, slept more soundly than I had in years, and found myself requiring less medication for the arthritis that had been my children's favorite evidence of my decline. I joined the community center's activities cautiously at first, attending a watercolor painting class where my complete lack of artistic ability became a source of shared laughter rather than embarrassment. The Tuesday hiking group welcomed me despite my initial slowness, with several members in their 70s and 80s demonstrating what was possible with consistent activity. Bill Thompson, a 70-year-old retired Forestry Service employee, took it upon himself to teach me the basics of wood chopping after spotting my awkward attempts to split logs for my wood stove. "You'll put your back out holding the axe like that," he called out one morning as he walked past my property. Before I knew it, he was demonstrating proper technique, his movements efficient and practiced despite his age. Under Bill's patient instruction, I learned not just about chopping wood but about identifying trees on my property, basic tool maintenance, and simple outdoor repairs. His kindness came without the patronizing tone I had grown accustomed to from my children, and I found myself looking forward to his occasional visits. The community's weekly potluck dinners became a highlight of my new social life. Unlike the tense family gatherings I had endured in Boston, these meals were genuinely welcoming, filled with laughter, music, and stories. No one cared about my designer clothes, now replaced by comfortable, practical attire, or prestigious address. What mattered was what dish you brought to share, what skills you could contribute to community projects, and whether you were kind to your neighbors. I discovered a passion for photography during a workshop at the community center, finding joy in capturing the changing seasons and small natural wonders of my new environment. My arthritis made handling complex camera equipment challenging, but a fellow photography enthusiast helped me select a lightweight digital camera with accessible controls. Local Dr. Diane Reynolds became not just my healthcare provider, but an advocate for my independent lifestyle. During my first checkup, she listened attentively to my health history without the dismissive attitude I had encountered from younger doctors in Boston. "Your vitals are excellent for any age," she commented after my examination. And the physical activity you're getting here is better than any medication I could prescribe. You made a smart choice for your health, Eleanor." Her validation of my decision brought unexpected tears to my eyes. For so long, I had internalized my children's view of me as fragile and declining. Having a medical professional see me as capable and thriving was powerfully affirming. Throughout these months of adjustment and growth, Samuel kept me informed of my children's reactions and actions. As expected, they had been shocked and outraged by my departure. Patrick had indeed consulted a lawyer about having me declared incompetent, but without access to me for a psychological evaluation, and with Samuel's evidence of my careful planning and rational decision-making, his case had no foundation. Veronica had apparently taken my departure as a personal rejection of her help, telling family friends that I was going through a phase and would come to my senses eventually. Gregory seemed genuinely concerned about my welfare, according to Samuel, more worried than angry about my choice. The sale of the family home had proceeded as planned, closing 3 months after my departure. This had triggered another wave of outrage from Patrick and Veronica, who had apparently already been discussing how they would divide the property and its contents. The proceeds from the sale were now securely invested according to my new financial plan, providing additional security for my future. My regular phone remained turned off, stored in a drawer in case I ever chose to access it again. Through Samuel, I sent brief messages assuring my family I was well but not yet ready for direct contact. Their responses, relayed by Samuel, ranged from Patrick's legal threats to Veronica's emotional manipulation to Gregory's simple request to know I was safe. 6 months into my new life, I celebrated with a special dinner attended by the friends who had become my chosen family: Martha, Bill, Diane, and several others from the community center. Looking around the table I had expanded to accommodate my guests, I realized how completely my life had transformed. My cabin had evolved too, with small improvements that made it truly mine. Curtains sewn with Martha's helped brighten the windows, a comfortable reading nook occupied one corner, and the beginnings of a serious herb garden flourished in pots on the porch. The neglected garden area was now cleared and prepared for spring planting, with advice from neighbors about what would grow best in the mountain climate. That evening, after my guests had departed and I was washing dishes at my sink, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window. The woman looking back at me was not the diminished, uncertain person who had stood in her Boston kitchen overhearing her children discuss her death. This woman stood straighter, her face more relaxed yet somehow stronger, her eyes clear and purposeful. I had not just changed my address. I had reclaimed myself. The phone call from Samuel came the next morning. "Eleanor," he said, his voice tense, "I wanted to warn you. Your children have hired a private investigator. I'm not sure how, but they've discovered your location. Patrick called my office demanding your exact address, which of course I refused to provide, but I believe they may be planning a visit. I wanted you to be prepared." I thanked him for the warning, my heart racing despite my outward calm. I had known this confrontation would come eventually. Now, with 6 months of independence and growth behind me, I felt ready to face whatever came next. The confrontation arrived on a beautiful spring afternoon. I was on my knees in the garden, planting tomato seedlings, when I heard a vehicle approaching on my gravel driveway. Few people came unannounced to my cabin, and the sound of a car larger than the typical local pickup trucks immediately put me on alert. I stood, brushing soil from my gardening gloves, as a large black SUV pulled up beside my modest older model. The rental tags were visible even from a distance, confirming my suspicion. My children had found me. Patrick emerged first from the driver's side, his expensive loafers entirely inappropriate for the gravel and dirt. Veronica exited the passenger side, sunglasses perched on her perfectly highlighted hair, looking as out of place in the mountains as a peacock among sparrows. Gregory climbed out last, his expression less certain than his siblings, his eyes taking in my property with what seemed like genuine curiosity rather than judgment. For a moment we simply stared at each other across the space between us. I was acutely aware of my appearance: faded jeans with soil stains at the knees, a flannel shirt with rolled-up sleeves, work gloves, and not a trace of the makeup Veronica had always insisted brightened my complexion. My hair, now completely silver and cut short for practicality by Martha's steady hands, caught the sunlight. Mom! Patrick finally broke the silence, his voice carrying a mixture of disbelief and annoyance. What is all this? We've been worried sick about you. I removed my gardening gloves calmly, buying myself a moment to steady my nerves. Hello Patrick, Veronica, Gregory. This is a surprise. A surprise. Veronica's voice rose incredulously. You disappeared without a word, sold our family home, and dropped off the face of the earth. Of course we're here. I noted her reference to our family home rather than my house, a telling slip that reinforced the rightness of my decision. I left a note, I replied evenly, and Samuel has been keeping you informed that I'm well. A cryptic two-sentence note after decades of family life. Patrick stepped forward, his business negotiation face firmly in place. Mom, this has gone on long enough. Whatever point you're trying to make has been made. It's time to come home where we can take care of you. Gregory, still hanging back near the car, finally spoke. You look different, Mom. Healthier, actually. His observation, free from the patronizing tone I had grown accustomed to, momentarily softened my guard. But Patrick quickly overshadowed the moment. This is ridiculous. Living out here alone, playing farmer at your age. He gestured dismissively at my garden. Do you have any idea what this stunt has put us through? The legal complications alone. I've had to hire specialists to untangle the mess you've made of your affairs. My affairs are in perfect order, Patrick, I said, my voice firmer than they had ever heard it. Would you like to come inside? I can make some tea and we can talk civilized. They followed me into my cabin, their expressions ranging from Patrick's barely contained anger to Veronica's theatrical dismay to Gregory's cautious curiosity. I was grateful I had tidied that morning. Not for their approval but because the clean, organized space reflected the intentional life I had created. You actually live here? Veronica looked around with undisguised horror at my simple furnishings. It's tiny. And what happened to all your beautiful things? Your antiques? Mom, this isn't you. This is more me than I've been in years, I replied, filling the kettle and setting it on the stove. Please sit down. They perched uncomfortably on my furniture like foreign dignitaries in a strange land. I prepared a tray with my locally made pottery mugs, honey from my neighbor's hives, and the herbal tea I had learned to blend myself. How did you find me? I asked as I served them, genuinely curious about what had led them to my door. Patrick snorted. We hired a private investigator, obviously. Did you really think we wouldn't track you down? You're our mother. I'm also an adult with the right to privacy, I countered, taking my own seat. But since you're here, we might as well have an honest conversation. Honest? Veronica's perfectly penciled eyebrows rose. You vanished without warning. I took a deliberate sip of my tea, then set down my mug carefully. I overheard your conversation last Mother's Day. All of it. The stunned silence that followed confirmed what I had suspected. They had never considered that I might have heard their callous discussion. Patrick recovered first, his expression shifting from shock to damage control. I don't know what you think you heard, Mom, but whatever it was, you misunderstood. We were just concerned about your welfare, your future. That's what families do. Mom's just waiting to die anyway. We need to talk about the house. I quoted his exact words, watching the color drain from his face. That's what concerned families say, Patrick. Planning how to sell my home out from under me? Discussing power of attorney to protect me from myself? Cataloging my possessions as if I were already gone. Gregory had the grace to look ashamed, his eyes fixed on his untouched tea. Veronica tried another approach, reaching for my hand across the table. I allowed the contact but felt nothing of the emotional manipulation that once would have swayed me. Mom, you have to understand, we were just trying to plan for inevitable eventualities. You were so lost after Dad died, and we wanted to make sure everything was taken care of. That's all. No, Veronica, that's not all, I said gently, withdrawing my hand. You were planning my absence, not my care. There's a profound difference. Patrick, always the strategist, changed tactics. Fine, you heard some things taken out of context and got upset. But this, he gestured around at my cabin, is an extreme overreaction. You could have talked to us instead of upending everyone's lives. Would you have listened? I asked simply, Or would you have dismissed my feelings as confusion, anxiety, or age-related decline, as you've been doing for the past 2 years? His silence was answer enough. I should tell you, I continued, that I've sold the house. The closing was finalized 3 months ago. You what? Patrick exploded, finally dropping his reasonable facade. That property was worth over $1 million. What have you done with the money? Tell me you haven't been swindled by some mountain development scheme. I waited until his outburst subsided. The proceeds are securely invested, Patrick. My financial advisor can assure you of that. But it's no longer your concern. Of course it's our concern. Veronica joined in. That's our inheritance you're playing with. And there it was, the naked truth I had overheard that Mother's Day, now openly acknowledged. I've also revised my will, I said, my voice steady despite the tension filling the small room. The majority of my estate will go to organizations supporting elderly independence and dignity. Each of my grandchildren has a trust for educational expenses only, with strict disbursement controls. For you 3, I've set aside family photographs and personal mementos of sentimental value. The explosion that followed was exactly as I had anticipated. Patrick surged to his feet, knocking his chair backward, his face flushed with rage. You can't do this. We'll contest it. You're clearly not in your right mind living in this shack in the middle of nowhere. Any court will see that. Veronica began to cry, her expertly applied mascara creating artistic streaks down her cheeks. How could you be so cruel, Mom? After everything we've done for you? This is how you repay our love and concern. Only Gregory remained seated, watching the scene with a strange mixture of emotions playing across his face. I waited for the initial outburst to subside before responding, my voice calm but firm. I am of perfectly sound mind, as my regular medical checkups confirm. The will is legally binding, witnessed and executed properly. As for cruelty, I suggest you reflect on how it felt to hear my own children discussing my death and possessions while I prepared dessert on Mother's Day. This isn't over, Patrick threatened, pacing the small space like a caged animal. I'll get power of attorney. You're clearly experiencing paranoid delusions. Samuel has extensive documentation of your financial inquiries and attempts to control my assets over the past 2 years, I replied, along with statements from my current physician about my excellent mental and physical health. But you're welcome to try, Patrick. Legal battles are expensive and time-consuming, though. You ungrateful. He began, but I cut him off, standing to my full height. This is my home, and I'm asking you to leave now. You know I'm alive and well, which was supposedly your concern. I'm happy to have a relationship with any of you who can respect my choices and independence, but not under these conditions. You heard Mom. Gregory spoke for the first time since the confrontation began. We should go. You're taking her side? Veronica turned her tearful performance toward her brother. I'm recognizing that we're on her property and she's asked us to leave, he replied quietly. And maybe that we deserve this. Patrick grabbed his jacket violently. This is insanity. Complete insanity. You'll regret this, Mom, when you need help and there's no one around for miles. What happens when you fall? When you get sick? When winter comes and you're snowed in? I have friends, healthcare, and community here, Patrick. More genuine support than I've felt in years. I walked to the door and held it open. I wish you a safe journey back. They filed out, Patrick and Veronica radiating fury and disbelief, Gregory lingering momentarily at the threshold. For what it's worth, Mom, I'm sorry, he said softly. You do look well here. I nodded, acknowledging his words but not yet ready to accept an apology that might be merely tactical. I stood on my porch as they climbed back into their rental SUV, watching as Patrick started the engine with unnecessary force. The vehicle reversed quickly, gravel sprang, then accelerated down my driveway and out of sight. Only when they were gone did I allow my composed facade to crack. My hands trembled violently as I closed the door and sank onto my sofa, the adrenaline of confrontation giving way to emotional exhaustion. I had held firm, but the encounter had drained me completely. Tears came, not of regret but of release, as if the last ties to my old life had finally been severed. A gentle knock at my door roused me from my emotional storm. I wiped my eyes quickly and opened it to find Martha standing there. A bottle of wine in one hand and 2 glasses in the other. Saw a fancy city car tearing out of here like the devil himself was chasing it, she said matter-of-factly. Figured you might need this. I laughed through my tears and stepped back to let her in. Martha, you have no idea how right you are. As we sat together, the afternoon light warming my small cabin, I recounted the confrontation. Martha listened without interruption, her weathered face reflecting understanding rather than pity. You stood your ground, she said approvingly when I finished. Not easy to do with family, especially children who think they know what's best for you. I don't know if I'll ever see them again, I admitted, voicing my deepest fear. Martha refilled our glasses thoughtfully. Some bridges can't be mended, and that's a hard truth. But some can, given time and changed perspectives. My youngest didn't speak to me for 2 years after I moved here. Now she's talking about buying land nearby for when she retires. Her words offered a small hope for the future, particularly regarding Gregory, whose apology had seemed potentially genuine. But even if reconciliation never came, I knew with bone-deep certainty that I had made the right choice for myself. The woman who had stood firm against her children's manipulation and entitlement was a woman I could respect when I looked in the mirror. That alone was worth everything I had risked. 1 year after my escape, as I had come to think of it, I celebrated with a special dinner on my new deck. Bill had helped me design and build it the previous summer. A spacious extension of my living space that offered views of the mountains and my now thriving garden. The rough boards beneath my feet had been sanded smooth, the railing adorned with hanging plants that cascaded colorful blooms in the early evening light. Martha arrived first, bringing her famous blackberry cobbler made with fruit we had harvested together from wild bushes on the boundary between our properties. Bill followed shortly after with a bottle of locally made apple wine and his gentle, unassuming presence that had become increasingly important to me over the months. Diane came with her wife Susan, both bringing professional perspectives that had helped me navigate my new life. Diane as my doctor and Susan as the community center's counselor, who had guided many discussion groups on family dynamics and aging. Other friends joined, each bringing dishes and stories to share, creating a tapestry of connection that had been entirely absent from my Boston existence. My garden now provided most of my vegetables, the rows of plants testimony to hours of physical labor and learning. The kitchen renovation Bill and I had completed gave me a bright, functional space where I enjoyed cooking for myself and friends. Solar panels installed on the south-facing portion of my roof supplemented my electricity, reducing my dependence on external systems. As we gathered around the large table on the deck, I looked at the faces surrounding me, illuminated by string lights and the setting sun. These were people who saw me clearly, who valued my contributions, who never once suggested I was simply waiting to die. They were my chosen family, bound by mutual respect rather than obligation. The year had brought changes in my relationship with my biological family as well. Gregory had contacted me through Samuel 3 months after the confrontation, asking if we could speak directly. Our first conversation was awkward, filled with long pauses and careful phrasing, but it opened a door. He had begun therapy, he told me, recognizing patterns in his own behavior that mirrored Patrick's controlling tendencies. I don't want my kids to feel about me the way you felt about us, he admitted during one call. Invisible and undervalued. Our relationship was rebuilding slowly with clear boundaries. He had visited twice alone, staying at a local bed and breakfast rather than my cabin, respecting my space while making genuine efforts to know the woman I had become rather than the mother he had dismissed. Patrick and Veronica remained estranged by their choice. Their initial legal threats had fizzled when confronted with the careful documentation Samuel and I had prepared, though not before costing them significant legal fees. According to Gregory, they spoke of me rarely, and when they did, it was with a mixture of resentment and revisionist history that cast them as victims of my mental decline, rather than catalysts for my departure. I had made peace with this outcome. While I would always love them as my children, I had learned that love without respect created toxic relationships that benefited no one. My days now had rhythm and purpose that had nothing to do with waiting for family visits or medical appointments. 3 mornings a week, I volunteered at the local library, Reading to children whose natural acceptance of an older woman's value was refreshingly uncomplicated. I had joined the community center's board, helping develop programs specifically for active seniors seeking to maintain independence. The local newspaper had featured my story in an article about reinvention after retirement, deliberately vague about my specific location to protect my privacy, but honest about my journey from invisible elder to engaged community member. The response had been overwhelming, with letters arriving from seniors throughout the region sharing similar experiences and asking for guidance. This unexpected role as an advocate and mentor had led to my newest project, a support group for older women navigating family pressures and seeking independence. We met weekly in the community center, sharing resources, strategies, and sometimes just the simple validation that our lives remained our own to direct. Martha raised her glass as twilight deepened around us. To Eleanor, who had the courage to start over when most people are settling for less. To new beginnings at any age, Diane added, her clinical perspective always balanced with genuine warmth. To building what you need instead of accepting what you're given, Bill said quietly, his eyes meeting mine with the special understanding that had grown between us over months of working side by side on projects, sharing meals, and gradually revealing our histories to each other. As conversations flowed around me, I reflected on the transformation of the past year. My health had improved dramatically with weight loss, increased strength, and reduced medication needs. My confidence had soared as I mastered new skills and contributed meaningfully to my community. Even my appearance had changed, with sun-kissed skin, silver hair I no longer felt compelled to color, and a straightness to my posture that reflected inner strength as much as physical improvement. Most importantly, I had reclaimed ownership of my future. Next month, I would embark on my first international trip alone, a 2-week exploration of the Italian countryside I had dreamed of visiting with Richard. While I still missed him daily, I had learned that honoring his memory meant living fully rather than existing in the shadow of loss. The evening continued with laughter, music from Bill's guitar, and conversations that ranged from philosophical to practical to simply silly. As stars appeared above our gathering, I felt a completeness I had not experienced since before Richard's death, perhaps even earlier. Later, after my guests had departed with warm embraces and plans for future gatherings, I stood alone on my deck, listening to the night sounds of my mountain home. A year ago, these sounds had frightened me with their unfamiliarity. Now they were the comforting soundtrack of a life I had chosen and built with my own hands. I thought of my children's certainty that I was just waiting to die, and the irony that their dismissal had catalyzed the most vibrant chapter of my life. In choosing myself, I had found not just independence but joy, purpose, and authentic connection. The cabin lights behind me illuminated the garden I had created from neglected earth, the home I had shaped from a stranger's house, the life I had claimed from the margins of my children's expectations. This was not an ending but a continuation, rich with possibility and entirely my own. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to prioritize your own happiness? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this journey of rediscovering myself in my later years resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and share this video with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late to start living on your own terms. Remember, the greatest act of courage is sometimes simply choosing yourself. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you the strength to write your own, no matter your age or circumstances.